Hello and welcome to Premiere 23 of the Internal Map of Reality and Introduction to Meditation. The purpose of these videos is to encapsulate the basic principles involved with the Internal Map of Reality. We also are weaving in some of the principles of meditation. Now, in the very early days, we broke down the introduction to meditation into very distinct units. At this point, I'm kind of blending it all in. You can go back and look at some of the earlier videos. And if you have questions about that, just email me. My email address is in the comments. Now, for those of you who are patrons, you will be able to email me and request a one-on-one telephone conversation. I have a North American-wide package, so I can call you at any time that's convenient for both of us and just talk about the material and help you work your way through it. So just email me anytime and we can set that up. At this point in time, there's no basically restriction on this. We're a small group, so we should be able to do it. At some point in the future, when I can upgrade my computer hardware and have a more capable streaming, I'll be able to do this live. Now, I have been in communication with Rose, and at this point, we just haven't been able to work out a time that, because of the time zone issues and so on, to work out a time that's compatible for Rose. But I'm sure we'll be able to get back into some kind of pattern as we move forward so that we can start doing some live sessions with Rose, and I might bring in some guests. So this is what we have on for today. We'll do a little discussion in a little bit more detail, but we will be, of course, having our 1-minute meditation, which I think is very important to keep that. I was going to remove it, and perhaps I was going to put back in the guided meditations. But the guided meditations, I think I'll do a whole separate premiere on just guided meditations, talking about it and the purpose. So the 1-minute meditation, you are practicing the detachment meditation. And although it's called detachment, it really is about how to maintain your focus in reality without becoming fixated. So one of the issues with people starting out with this material, they become fixated on particular points, and that can actually block you, prevent you from progressing. But if you practice the detachment meditation, you'll learn that you're focusing on a point and you're going to allow new information to come in. You're not going to resist it, just going to look at it. And then you make a decision to let that information flow by you and to return back to your focal point. So it's a soft focus needed to progress. And I also honestly believe that to progress, you need to be able to focus. And there's a trick to it. So the trick is to do it gently and softly. Then we'll go into some content, which is the following up of your modes of thinking. And we're going to go deeper into that, exploring the process of thought. And this tonight we'll be going into reviewing what it was like to have an early childhood memory, in which case I'm going to be drilling into my first day at school. And we'll use that as an example of how to explore your memory frames. And then we'll wrap it up by looking at the power of the subconscious. Now, this really is all about your subconscious, and I must say the subconscious gets a bad rap. It's really your best friend. It's what keeps you alive. I know so many times through my life, and maybe there's some stories here that we can all share, that I was bent and determined to go in one direction, but my subconscious knew better. Either I got very, very ill and I couldn't do it, or something distracted me and I couldn't do it, or I would have this, I call it the pressure, the pushback, the wall. And whenever I feel a push, pressure, like I'm trying to swim against the current, against the Tao, against the flow. You feel it. It's a physical pressure. And that's your subconscious, your greater self talking to you. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't progress, but it means that you need to put more attention onto it. In some cases, that pressure I felt was that I should do it, but I had to adjust my personal understanding of it. I had to reset how I was approaching it. It was very, very important. So the pressure thing to me now means that it's an important, something is approaching, or I am approaching a threshold of something that's important. Now we're going to be going into thresholds later on, but we're going to stick now just with drilling into memory. Okay, I hope you enjoy this. And remember, if you're a Patreon, just email me and we can just have a really gentle chit chat about the material. Maybe there are things that you would like me to go further into, that kind of thing. So, with that said, let's go and do the 1 minute detachment meditation. Remember to, when you're doing this on your own, allow yourself to go longer than 1 minute. You can go, I would think, quite comfortably to 5 minutes if you want. And those of you that may be much more relaxed can use the same detachment principle to go for 15, 20 minutes. And I know I was able to work myself up to an hour of just sitting quietly, focusing, gently focusing in a detachment way. And that has tremendous, tremendous benefits. Okay, so with that said, what I'm going to do is to start the 1 minute meditation. And what you are beginning to realize is that understanding frames as the mechanism for the way that we have thoughts, communicate thoughts, and process our mental states and behaviors is key. It all comes from the frame. So we have a frame that has some material in it, and based on the material in that frame and the meaning that we've assigned to it, we have a mental state change and a behavioral change. So this is the crux of understanding the internal map reality. So we'll spend a little time on this exercise. And what I thought I would do is basically walk through one example that we can discuss. So in the exercise, I requested that you look at a frame from your childhood, from the distant past, a frame from your sort of recent current experience, and a frame from the future, some planned activity. In addition to identifying the 6 modes and the modalities, I want you to go a bit deeper and understand whatever meaning may have been assigned to that frame. And in addition, I want you to begin to understand if there was a mental state change because of the frame or a behavioral change. And by behavioral change, I mean, did it create a physiological response, such as getting sleepy, getting hungry, getting whatever, or an actual activity. Like there are some frames that I use, and I've mentioned this before, to get up and get going first thing in the morning. That's a behavioral change. And finally, I want you to begin to make the assessment of whether the frame was overall resourceful. Was it a resourceful outcome for you? Was the mental shift or the behavioral shift of benefit? Okay, so this is critical to understanding where to go forward with this. Is you make an assessment of resourcefulness. Now, resourceful for you might be different than me. So there's no universal resourceful. It's whatever is resourceful for you. So we expanded the data collection aspect, and we have our 6 modes. We put in our 4 filters: the time filter, the frequency filter, the associated filter, and the solution finder filter. So we'll talk about those. And then finally, there's our mental state change and our behavioral change, so we can record that. And then below, there's the overall meaning, and then the assessment at the bottom. Was this resourceful or not? So I took this basic spreadsheet and I expanded it to include a couple of leading questions to help collect the data. Now you notice that modes are in 2 locations. In the first top part of this, you see modes, 6 modes, and that is really the upper level main description of it. And then further down, where it gets into submodalities, that's where you can get into more detail about each one. And I'll have examples for that. So there was a tab on your spreadsheet, one for the past, one for the present, and one for the future. I picked a past, so I'm going to do a past memory with you. And the past memory that I wanted to recall, the frame I wanted to recall, was my first day of school. So I sat down and said, okay, what was my first day of school? And the first question said, well, I'm getting some feelings, some impressions. Are they photos or films? What are they? And in my case, it was a series of photos. In my mind, I saw the picture of the school in the schoolyard, the hallways, I could see them. But the main one was the room that I ended up in my first day of school. Okay. Now, there could have been no visuals. It could have just been sounds, right? Or it could have been movies. It could have been a whole film series of other films. But in this case, each little component of this frame was like a flip chart. So flip the school, then the next one the hallway, and then the next one the room, those little animated flip charts we have. And the images in it were still. So that's important. Okay. So then the overall mode for me in this frame was visual. And the way I described it in the visual components of those little photos, I saw the building, the halls, and the classroom, so I could see them. I was there. And then sounds, I heard the sounds of the bell that would, call everyone in, and it would go off at different times for recess and whatnot. And there was a loudspeaker in the classroom, and, there would be voices that would come over that. And the teacher's voice was very loud and very dominating. And for me, all of those were just sounds, nothing really recognizable other than the quality of them. Physically, I was in the classroom and I felt the seat that I was in was too small. So I felt uncomfortable in that seat. And I can remember that I may have also been uncomfortable with my new clothes, because I probably had on some first day school clothing that my mother got, and everything was new. Smells, Now my chair was near the blackboard, and in those days they used chalk. And I can remember the smell of the chalk, and I can think I could even reach over and touch the chalkboard and the ledge where the chalk was. And there was cleaning fluid. They cleaned the classroom for that first day, and it was really strong smell. It's maybe something like pine sol. Taste, at some point they gave a treat of milk and cookies, and those milk cookies, right? But the milk wasn't cold. It was kind of warm, and it kind of had a taste, an aftertaste. And the cookie dissolved really quickly, and it kind of had a dry kind of taste to it. That kind of stood in my mind. Now, what's really interesting with this, my first day of school frame, is that there were no words. I couldn't recall any words of anyone actually talking to me or me actually saying words, just the other 5 aspects. So then when we drill down and we look at the submodalities, and we just drill into those a little bit. In the submodalities, what we're talking about is what was the quality of the situation with my visual. So everything was bright. The classroom was very bright. All the lights were on and the windows were bright. So it was a very bright, well-lit type of scenario. And the sounds were harsh. The sounds were very loud and piercing. Okay, so that was the quality of the sounds. And physically, it was just an overall sensation of feeling awkward and uncomfortable in that seat and perhaps the clothes. And the smells, the strong smell of the cleanser stood out the most. Okay, the chalk smell, it was there, but the strongest smell was the one that caught my attention throughout the day. And taste, as I mentioned before, was the taste in my mouth of the warm milk, the quality of it, not being cold or fresh, or just this aftertaste. And again, the fact that there were no words that I could distinguish. So let's take a look at the filters. Now, the timeline filter we will be working with a lot. In this scenario here, we just want to identify, was it in the past and where it was in my past. So it was a past, and it was in my distant past. I was quite young, 5, 6, whatever, first day of school. And now there's other things that we can do with the timeline, and we'll be playing with that as we go forward. The other filter is frequency. This is sometimes used to identify whether people need to hear something more than once to be able to act on it, or whether they only need to hear it once. Another aspect of this filter is that some people only want to hear something once, and some people need to hear it many times. Another aspect of the frequency filter is how often you recall this frame. Now, in terms of this frame was something that I don't normally recall. This was recalled especially for this assignment as an example. But some frames you may recall a lot, many times a day and frequently. And that's important to know. In terms of whether this frame was an associate, whether it was personal or impersonal, it was very personal. I was right there. I was seeing it through my eyes, and I could describe things the way they affected me physically and in terms of taste and smell and whatever. So very associated. And finally, solution filter. Was this a solution or a problem? I'm going to say this was a bit of a problem. Definitely not a solution. There were issues there that I identified. So I was identifying issues with the brightness of the light and the loudness of the voices, the uncomfortableness of the seat, the strong smells of the cleanser. I was seeing them as kind of problems. Okay, now let's move to outcomes. Was there a mental state change? Did it change the state? Yes, I say it did, because when I look at this frame and I just, meditate on it a bit, I get an overall feeling of being restricted and being isolated. So I was restricted in that classroom, in that seat, and I couldn't move. So that feeling of being restricted and controlled. Was there a physiological change? Well, in terms of action, this frame didn't really want me to do anything. Now there may have been a physiological change. Now sometimes when you look at a frame, it can make you change you physiologically. It can make you feel one way or another physically, such as sleepy, such as healthy. There are some frames that I use to build my health, my personal health. Okay, so no big noticeable behavioral change. Now, the overall meaning of this frame, I would say that this frame, what it means to me is the experience of going to a location, i.e. the school, where I was restricted and isolated and controlled. I kind of see it as meaning, if I was to have a frame that depicted being restricted and isolated, I would recall this frame. Overall, was this frame resourceful or not? Well, I would tend to say this is not a resourceful frame. It's not a frame that I would like to recall to, as a power frame, for example. Now, here's a little look ahead to where we're going with the internal map reality. So we have a frame in front of us, my first day of school, and I identified that it's not really a resourceful frame. With our knowledge of all the submodalities and the filters, we can change the outcome. So if we wanted this, instead of me feeling restricted as an outcome, mental state outcome, if I wanted it to feel freedom, all I would need to do is to mess around with any of those submodalities or with the filters. And this is what we'll be doing later on. So we'll identify a frame that is non-resourceful, and to make it resourceful, in this case, all I would need to do is perhaps change one of the modalities where I didn't have words. Maybe I could put words in there that instilled action for freedom and independence. So I could maybe hear words in there of saying, Steve, you're okay. You can get up and go. You don't have to stay here. That kind of thing. Now, I'm not recommending that you do this at this point. I just want to point out that that's what we will be doing. There's a few things we have to be aware of. So at this point, when you recall a frame, either yours or someone else's, don't mess around with them at this point. Just collect the information and make a note of it. Okay, so later on we will. So 3 wishes subconscious, and today is the last day of the year for 2021. So I thought I'd do this one because we all have wishes for the new year. So under this topic, what I will be covering, and I'll try to keep it fairly brief, will be one, the subconscious realm. We will be going into that in greater detail in the Intro to Meditation course, but it needs to be talked about here briefly. Then the whole idea of 3 wishes that it is covered in many, many books and movies and songs about people making 3 wishes, and nothing can go wrong, right? Then we have to review the source of all pain and suffering, because this is related to the 3 wishes and how people end up getting pain and suffering when they make their wishes. Then, of course, no discussion about the subconscious would be fit without talk about the kittens without mittens, and how we can actually have wishes that are away from what we want, and the solution being having preferred outcomes rather than rigid outcomes, and overall acceptance. So let's jump right into it. As I've been saying all along, the subconscious really is well over 90% of our being. On a conscious level, I like to think of the conscious as a flashlight looking around a big, big dark room, and we only see what the flashlight highlights. In the conscious, we're conscious of our willpower. We're conscious of what we can remember about our past, and we have the logical way of approaching our situation and critically analyzing our way of being. But if I was to bet money, where would I put my money? On somebody that knew 10% of the subject or someone that knew 90% of the subject? So our subconscious contains all of our beliefs, our emotions, our habits, our values, our reactions, proactive reactions to things, instantaneously reacting to things. And it also has a long-term memory. And I think the subconscious long-term memory is in fact more detailed and accurate than our conscious filtered version. And it has our imagination and, of course, our intuition. So when we're faced with the option of having 3 wishes, and if we make those wishes from our conscious mind, there's a very good chance we could make a mistake. There's a very good chance because our subconscious will not override our will. So if we ask for something consciously, our subconscious, like the genie in the bottle, will rush off to do it. But there's a very good chance, unless we have meditated and have an understanding of how the subconscious works, there's a very good chance that we'll make the wrong wish. If we make a wish that is a counter to our 90%, if we consciously make a wish that's counter to our subconscious, we could actually end up in pain and suffering. So let's review the 3 areas of pain and suffering. Well, the first way we get pain is by not getting what we want. We want something, we're not getting it, and we suffer. And we probably all know people who are very, very unhappy because they can't get that job, or they can't get that girl or boy or whatever it is they want. There's something in their life they can't get, and they suffer. And some people suffer greatly. The other way people suffer is they get something they don't want. And all of us have had the phone ring and someone on the other end of the phone giving us news that we didn't want. Or we've gotten that slip in our paycheck that said we no longer had a job. Something that has come along and it's not what we want, and we suffer. And then the third way that we suffer is that we get what we want and then we lose it. I know people who have lost it all, and I've lost many, many things in my life. They come and they go. So here is the trick, that when we're making those wishes, we could easily make the mistake and wish and get one of these 3 things. And how does this happen? Well, the trick is to never wish for what you want. And you're probably thinking right now, what do you mean, never wish for what you want? I thought this whole thing about the internal map of reality and meditation was to get what you want. Yes, but listen to this. If you know anyone who is extremely successful, say very, very wealthy, and if you walk up to them and say to them, hey, were you ever poor? And I bet you a fortune that they will look at you and say, I was never poor, even when I only had 1 penny in my pocket, because I knew that I was wealthy and I was going to be wealthy. So the trick to making this wish for what you want is not to wish for what you want, because your subconscious will say, oh, well, if you want something, that must mean you don't have it. You wish for something to expand. You assume that you already have it, but you only want it to grow and and prosper, and you want it to become immersed in it. So never want something, because that just means you don't have it. You want it to grow. You already have it, but you want that flower, whatever it is, that plant, the seed, to grow. So the trick here is, when you're conversing with your subconscious, is never express not having. Express having and wanting it to flourish. Okay? The other thing never to do is never wish for what you don't want. Now, this sounds really peculiar. You say, well, why would someone wish for what they don't want? Well, here's how this goes. You probably hear people saying this: boy, I don't want to do that because I don't want something like this to happen to me. I don't want to lose this. I don't want to, I don't. Well, whenever you wish for something not to happen, the very first thing your subconscious does is it says, oh, well, in order for something not to happen, you have to basically have it first and then, get rid of it. So it will attract you to the thing you don't want. So wishing for what you don't want will get you exactly that. So what do you do here? Well, you focus on what you want. And go back to the first one. You focus on what you want, but you focus on it in a creative and expansive way. You put yourself in the position. I think back to that quote I showed in another session about Muhammad Ali. He said, think you're be the greatest. And if you don't think you're the greatest, you got to act like you're the greatest. If you're not wealthy, you got to act like you're wealthy. If you're not doing the job you want, you need to think that you are moving towards it and that you are actually creating that job right now. If there's something you want to do, don't say to people, well, I hope to do this. Say that I am moving towards this. This is what I'm doing. Okay? So never wish for what you want. Just go for it and be it. Never wish for what you don't want. Focus on what you want. Just be it. And the third thing that we could do is that we will try to keep and lock and imprison what we have. I wrote a book called Lovebirds in a Cage, which is about this last point here, where people get something, say it's a relationship, and they really love this person, they're in this loving relationship, but they don't want to lose it, so they encage that person, they imprison them, they prevent them from seeing other people, they prevent them from even talking to or about other people, and they actually then lose that person. The best way to lose someone is to cage them. And what's the one thing that they will then want to do is to be free. So never try to lock up and, if something is done and it's time for it to go, let it go. It's only when you let what needs to go that the new comes. So you never wish to keep hold of something, because that would definitely create that opposite reaction. Okay, so nothing would be really fitting unless we talk about those kittens without mittens. You got to wonder, how did those kittens lose their mittens? Is it possible that the mother cat said to the kittens, go to school, but don't lose your mittens? Did she tell them to lose the mittens by passing that command to them? The kittens were only doing what the mother cat said, lose the mittens. How could you not lose them unless you lose them first? So in any event, telling someone not to lose something is creating a situation where they are focused on the actual act that you don't want them to do. So what might that mother cat said to her kittens? Well, perhaps she could have said, here's your mittens. When you go to school, make sure you bring them home. Or she could have said, here's your mittens. Hang on to them and always keep them near. She could have given an affirmation that was a little bit more in line with the outcome that she wants. So the lesson here is, if you don't want your kittens to lose their mittens, tell them to hang on to their mittens. Tell them to bring the mittens home. So this takes us into making wishes that are actually giving you the opposite of what you're asking for. And I call those away from wishes. You're making wishes that are taking you away from what you actually want. And this is an extremely common event. And when we get into setting up our goals and working on that, the one thing that we will do is first assess our goals and look at them in terms of these three wishes. Is the goal that we've set up really something that is an away from wish? So this is very important. And this is something that, before you confirm that this is what you want, make sure you're not asking for the reverse. So here's a little one method of dealing with your subconscious when you're asking your subconscious to fulfill a desire, is to put it as a preferred outcome rather. So you say to your subconscious, I really would prefer that this cup be full. That's what I prefer. It's half full now, but, I kind of would prefer it to be full. So you set your desire or your wish as a preferred outcome. And what does that do? That leaves room for you to be wrong. I could be wrong about what I want. Maybe my 90% doesn't really want that act or that activity or that outcome. So if I set it as a preferred, and if it's not really in line with what my subconscious, my 90%, really is intuitively moving towards, then there's a chance that I won't get it, but I'll get what I actually internally in the deep within my subconscious really want. So set your conscious desires up as a preferred outcome and, be willing to accept the outcome. So, I like this expression. Acceptance is the simple recognition of the truth that this is the way things are in this moment. So this is the way it is. Doesn't mean it can't change in the future, but accepting for what the outcome is right now. Then you can move on. Acceptance is a big one. But if you make a wish, make sure you're prepared to accept the outcome of that wish. This is why I like this particular topic and talking about it and bringing it up, because it falls under the general topic of how to communicate with your subconscious. And we'll be digging further into this as we go forward. So that's pretty much my little discussion, my bonus topic. As I said, there are many, many, many other areas that need to be, just brought up and discussed. So I find the whole area of self-development, growth, meditation, and our internal map of reality a huge topic area with many, many, many rabbit holes that we can go down. So thank you and see you in our next session.